Elena Cross was 32 years old, but the years behind her felt heavier than the stripes on her uniform. Officially, she was a mechanic at Falcon Air Base, a woman who kept the F-22 Raptors polished, inspected, and safe for the pilots who claimed the skies. To her colleagues, she was quiet, dependable, even unremarkable. She blended into the hangar noise, hydraulic pumps, distant ground crews shouting, the metallic groan of machines under repair. But beneath the oil-stained gloves and the steady, practical hands was a secret. Years earlier, Elena had not been just a mechanic. She had once worn the flight suit, stood on the tarmac under the Nevada sun, and graduated from Top Gun, one of the most competitive pilot training programs in the world. Few ever earned that honor. Even fewer walked away from it. And Elena had walked away. Every morning, as she tightened bolts on an F-22's panels or ran her fingers across the smooth titanium skin of the jet, she felt the pull of the sky. She remembered the way her hands used to grip a throttle, the way her body once moved in rhythm with a machine built for speed and survival. But she never spoke of it, not to her fellow mechanics, not to the young recruits who looked at her as just another technician. The past remained buried, hidden under long sleeves and silence. Her father, General Richard Cross, had made sure of that. To him, Elena was never a real pilot, no matter what her records once said. A mechanic can't fly, he had declared more times than she could count. And if the base believed him, then so be it. It was easier to stay invisible than to fight the weight of his name. So Elena played her role. She laughed politely at jokes in the break room. She nodded through safety briefings. She kept her head down, tightening bolts, running diagnostics, filing reports. But when no one was watching, when the hangar lights dimmed late at night, she would sit in the cockpit of a silent Raptor. She'd rest her hands on the controls, as if they still belonged there. And for a few stolen minutes, she allowed herself to breathe like the pilot she still was. Grounded by choice, grounded by force, and yet in her heart, the sky had never let her go. The morning hum of Falcon Air Base was steady, a rhythm Elena Cross had grown used to, jet engines whining on warm-up, the sharp smell of fuel, the echo of tools striking steel. She was crouched by the nose of an F-22, wiping oil from a panel, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled to her elbows. For her, this was comfort, the precision of the checklist, the calm of routine. But routine shattered with the sound of boots. Heavy, deliberate, unyielding. The hangar doors framed the tall figure of General Richard Cross. Shoulders squared, jaw clenched, eyes burning with that familiar command presence. Conversation stilled. Crew members paused mid-task. Even the whir of ground equipment seemed to fade beneath his arrival. He didn't greet his daughter. He didn't soften his tone. Instead, he threw his hard hat onto the steel workbench. The sharp clang cut through the air like a gunshot. "Elena!" he barked, his voice carrying across the hangar. "A mechanic can't fly." Every eye turned. The crew froze. A wrench slipped from one man's hand, hitting the floor with a metallic ring. Even the younger recruits, who only knew Elena as a quiet technician, stiffened at the raw authority in the general's voice. Elena straightened slowly, rag in hand, refusing to flinch. She met his gaze, calm but unwavering. Her father jabbed a finger toward the cockpit of the Raptor. "You think hiding behind tools changes the truth? You think grease under your nails makes you a pilot? Prove it, or stop wearing that uniform." The silence that followed was suffocating. The base, so often alive with noise, felt like it had inhaled and refused to exhale. For a heartbeat, Elena said nothing. She let the words hang in the air, let the sting of humiliation wash over her without reaction. She had heard this line before, whispered at home, muttered in arguments, drilled into her like gospel. But never like this, not in front of the men and women who believed she was just another mechanic. She dropped the rag onto the workbench, the sound soft but deliberate. Then, Without a word, she moved toward the ladder, leaning against the jet. Her father's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. The crew exchanged glances. Some looked horrified, others curious, as if sensing that something larger than rank was unfolding before them. Elena gripped the ladder, placed her boot on the first rung, and began to climb. Calm, silent, deliberate. For the first time in years, she wasn't hiding. And the confrontation had only just begun. The cockpit smelled faintly of sealant and cold glass as Elena eased herself into the seat. Every switch, every dial, every curve of the control panel was muscle memory. Her hands hovered just above the controls, steady, sure, practiced. The hangar crew had gone utterly silent. Some stood with arms folded, others with tools hanging forgotten in their hands. All of them were watching. General Richard Cross stood 2 steps from the ladder, arms crossed, his posture daring her to move. His voice, sharp as steel, echoed in the air. Go on, Elena. Show them. Show them you're nothing more than a mechanic playing dress-up. Elena reached for the harness, pulling it across her shoulders. The straps were stiff, the familiar weight pressing against her chest. As she adjusted, the sleeve of her coveralls slid back. It was a small motion, barely noticeable, but in that instant, the world seemed to stop. Ink. Black. Bold. Unmistakable. TG0717. The letters and numbers curved cleanly across her wrist, etched into her skin with permanence that no denial could erase. The colonel nearby froze mid-command. A crew chief stopped halfway, threw a hand signal. Someone in the back of the hangar dropped a coffee cup. It clattered once, then rolled into silence. Richard Cross's eyes locked on the mark. His face drained of color, his jaw slackening for the first time in memory. This was no rumor, no family boast, no exaggerated tale whispered in corridors. This was proof. The designation was known across bases, whispered with reverence. Top Gun 0717. One of the rare few graduates from the Navy's elite fighter program. The kind of training that only legends survived. For 12 years, Richard had told anyone who would listen that his daughter was nothing but a maintenance worker. For 12 years, Elena had let them believe it. Now, the truth glared back at him in black ink. The hangar seemed to breathe as one, an intake of shock that never released. Soldiers and mechanics exchanged stunned looks, their disbelief mixing with awe. Richard's voice, once ironclad, faltered. "Top Gun!" he whispered, almost to himself. Elena tugged the strap tight, the tattoo vanishing beneath her sleeve once more. Her expression never changed. Calm, focused, unflinching. She lowered the visor of the helmet, blocking out the stunned faces around her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a single thought. No more hiding. The silence in the hangar had barely settled when the radios crackled to life. Urgent, sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Shadow flight, scramble alert. Immediate launch. 1 seat short. The word sent a ripple through the crew. The air changed, suddenly electric, urgent, alive. Ground teams scrambled. Pilots ran for their jets. Somewhere down the runway, engines roared awake, their growl shaking the concrete. Richard Cross didn't flinch. His eyes were still fixed on Elena, still burning with the humiliation of what he had just seen. The tattoo, the truth he had spent years burying. He jabbed a finger toward the cockpit. "You, in the jet, now." A gasp broke from one of the younger recruits. Another mechanic shook his head in disbelief. "Sir, she's not." But Richard cut him off with a thunderous bark. "That's an order." His tone left no room for argument. It wasn't just command. It was vengeance disguised as discipline. He didn't want Elena to succeed. He wanted her exposed, undone in front of the entire base. Elena met his glare for a long, steady moment. She could see it in his eyes. The trap, the expectation that she would fail, that she would finally prove him right. But instead of resisting, she slid her gloves tighter and lowered the visor across her face. "Copy," she said, her voice even. The colonel stepped closer, his tone firm but measured. "Tower needs a fourth bird in the air. Authorization stands. Cross, if you can fly, do it clean. No theatrics." Elena gave a single nod. Procedure, not pride. Duty, not defiance. The ground crew moved into position, still stunned but obeying orders. One by one, their thumbs went up. Signaling systems were ready. The jet's batteries whined to life, screens glowing across the console. The Raptor began to awaken beneath her hands, its power humming like a heartbeat in sync with her own. Richard stood rigid at the edge of the hangar, his jaw locked, his fists tight. To him, this was a spectacle, a stage where his daughter would finally stumble. But as the engines roared louder, filling the hangar with thunder, Elena wasn't thinking of him. She wasn't thinking of the stares or the whispers. Her eyes locked on the runway ahead, sunlight cutting across the tarmac like a blade. For the first time in years, she wasn't just a mechanic. She was a pilot again, and the sky was calling. The moment Elena's gloved hand flipped the master switch, the F-22 came alive. Screens flickered to green. Indicators pulsed in rhythmic order. The steady whine of the auxiliary power unit swelled into a living heartbeat, and the hangar fell into silence. No one shouted. No one moved. The crew that normally buzzed with noise and chatter stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the cockpit where a mechanic moved with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. One by one, her hands flowed across the controls. Hydraulics, oxygen flow, fuel pumps, each switch flicked in exact sequence. No hesitation, no uncertainty. She didn't need a manual. She didn't even need to look. It was muscle memory. It was training. It was truth. From the floor, the colonel, lean, sharp-eyed, a man who had seen enough pilots to know real skill when he saw it, watched carefully. He had expected nerves, hesitation, a mistake that would confirm the general's accusation. But Elena's movements told another story. Every system test passed clean. Every call-out was steady, level, professional. "Shadow 4, systems green," she said into the radio, her voice carrying across the intercom. Not a trace of fear, not a hint of bluff. The colonel's gaze narrowed. He knew the difference between improvisation and mastery. This wasn't guesswork. This wasn't luck. She belonged in that seat. The ground crew exchanged uneasy looks. Some whispered under their breath, "How does she know this?" Others stared in awe, as if witnessing something forbidden. Richard Cross, however, stood rigid, his jaw set like granite. His daughter was not failing. She was proving him wrong in front of the entire base, and for a man who thrived on control, that was worse than open defiance. Elena lowered her visor, blocking the stairs, shutting out the storm building around her. Inside the cockpit, it was just her and the machine. No whispers, no accusations, no shadows of her father, only the silence of a hangar holding its breath. The engines roared, vibrating through the hangar floor, rattling loose tools on the benches. The F-22 was no longer a machine under inspection. It was alive, hungry for the sky. Shadow flight, cleared for immediate scramble. The tower called. 3 Raptors thundered toward the runway in formation, afterburners blazing like molten fire. A 4th was expected. A 4th had been missing. Until now, Elena eased the throttle forward. The jet rolled from the hangar, its nose weaving down the yellow center line, ground crews scattering out of its path. The sunlight caught the canopy, turning it into a mirror that reflected a woman hidden for too long. On the tarmac's edge, General Richard Cross stood with arms folded tight, his face carved into stone. For 12 years, he had declared his daughter unfit, unworthy, incapable of flight. Now he was watching her taxi out, her call sign echoing across the frequency. "Shadow 4 ready for departure." The colonel's voice answered with calm certainty. Copy, Shadow 4. Join the line. No theatrics. Do the work. Elena's lips curved into the faintest smile beneath her helmet. That's the plan, sir. She held short behind the others, engines growling at a restrained snarl. The air shimmered with heat as the lead jet thundered forward, lifting from the earth in a streak of power. The second followed, then the third, each climbing steep into the blue. Now it was her turn. Shadow 4, cleared immediate, the tower commanded. Elena shoved the throttles forward. The F-22 screamed down the runway, the world narrowing to speed and vibration, numbers climbing in a blur. At 140 knots, she pulled back on the stick. The nose lifted, the wheels left Earth, and in a heartbeat, the base fell away beneath her. Concrete shrank to gray lines. Hangars turned to dots. Her father became nothing more than a rigid shadow on the ground. The jet sliced into the sky, clean and certain, wings catching the morning sun. She slid into formation, filling the empty slot as if it had always been hers. For 12 years, Elena Cross had hidden in silence. Now, as Shadow 4, she vanished into the clouds, no longer a mechanic, no longer grounded. She was a pilot again. The 4 Raptors streaked eastward, their contrails carving silver lines across the morning sky. From the ground, the formation looked perfect, seamless, as though Shadow 4 had always been part of it. But inside the control tower, chaos simmered beneath the calm exterior. Headsets buzzed. Controllers exchanged sharp glances over their consoles. Officers leaned over screens, whispering questions none of them were ready to answer. Who cleared her for flight? One voice hissed across the comms, low but biting. No one did. Another snapped back. But are you going to call her down mid-scramble? She's already airborne. A young lieutenant stared at the radar scope, disbelief plain on his face. She knows the comms protocols. Every call-out is by the book. His superior cut him off with a scoff. By the book? She's a mechanic who hijacked the deadliest jet in our arsenal. This isn't skill, it's recklessness. Down in the hangar, murmurs rippled like wildfire. Ground crew clustered together, voices rising and falling in disbelief. She started that jet smoother than half the pilots I've seen, one sergeant muttered. She's going to crash it, another insisted. Just wait. The general was right. She doesn't belong up there. But then someone else spoke, quieter, almost reverent. You saw the tattoo. TG-0717. That's not a decoration. That's Top Gun. The words carried weight, cutting through the noise. Silence lingered for a moment before the arguments erupted again. In the command post, senior officers debated furiously. Some demanded immediate disciplinary orders. Others urged patience, unwilling to interrupt a live rescue mission. Only the colonel remained still, eyes fixed on the monitors tracking Shadow Flight's course. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and measured, cutting through the storm. Debate all you want, but facts don't lie. She's flying. The room fell quiet. High above, Elena Cross held her position in the diamond formation, steady and unshaken. She couldn't hear the whispers, the arguments, the doubts swirling below. But she didn't need to. She had expected them. What mattered now wasn't their voices. It was the mission. The Raptor's canopy glinted against the sun as Elena scanned the instruments, eyes darting between radar sweeps and terrain overlays. Below, the earth unrolled in sharp ridges and shadowed valleys, the kind of terrain that swallowed men whole if rescue didn't come fast enough. On the mission channel, the colonel's voice was crisp. Shadow Flight, Priority 1, down pilot. Last beacon ping, grid 587 by 219. Time on station is critical. Elena's gloved hands moved over the controls, trimming, adjusting, steady. Her voice was calm as she answered. Shadow 4 copies. Uploading terrain scan. Her display painted a jagged valley, thick with pine, broken by smoke from a fire that had sparked days earlier. It was no place for helicopters to linger. Wind currents twisted unpredictably, threatening to flip rotors if pilots weren't careful. A faint voice broke over the guard frequency, strained and uneven. "This is Bravo 2, down shoulder out, holding position." The base went silent. The survivor was alive, but barely. "Shadow 4, can you get eyes?" the colonel asked. "Affirm," Elena replied. She pitched lower, letting the radar sharpen into high-resolution mapping. Her heart pounded, but her tone stayed level. "Reading possible clearing, 60 meters, ring by deadfall. Coordinates marked. Best approach vector 180. Departure 05. Winds gusting 12, shifting 16. Hello must stay low, enter fast." The other pilots said nothing, but she could feel the weight of their listening. Every word she spoke wasn't from manuals, it was lived experience. The kind of tactical precision only years of flight training could forge. Down below, the faint voice of the injured pilot returned, weak but hopeful. "Copy, heard water nearby, can't move far." Elena glanced at the topo overlay, spotting a creek threading the valley floor. She smiled faintly inside her helmet. "That tracks, Bravo 2. Sit tight. You're not alone anymore." Minutes later, the rescue helicopter skimmed low, hugging the ridge. Its rotors churned dust and smoke, searching for the mark. Elena's voice guided them in, smooth and exact. 10 meters left. Keep nose level. Gust shift in final 10 yards. Commit now. The helicopter flared, skids kissing dirt in the small clearing. Medics spilled out, running low beneath the spinning rotors. From above, Elena tightened her orbit, wings steady, eyes scanning for threats. Rescue inbound to survivor, a medic confirmed over comms. Shadow 3 broke silence, his voice tinged with awe. 4, when did you learn to read terrain like that? Elena's answer was quiet, almost sharp. Enough to do my job. Below, the medics reached the downed pilot. The mission wasn't finished, but the hardest part was over. And the entire squadron knew this was no mechanic guessing her way through. This was a pilot. The rotor wash churned dust and pine needles into a storm as the medics reached the downed pilot. Through Elena's canopy, she caught glimpses of movement, shadows darting low, the flash of reflective tape on their uniforms. Her comms crackled with strain. Survivor located, shoulder injury confirmed. Extraction in progress. Elena tightened her orbit, her raptor sweeping like a guardian above the valley. Every second mattered. A shift in the wind, a hesitation in the hello's lift, a wrong vector. Any of it could turn triumph into tragedy. Her eyes locked on the radar and the terrain feed. She read the valley like a map she had memorized years ago. Every tree line, every gust, every dangerous pocket of air. "Hello, adjust nose 2 degrees east," she instructed, voice steady. "Tailwind will square you up with the creek. Depart on heading 005, smooth climb, no hesitation." The helicopter pilot acknowledged without question, trusting her words. Trusting a mechanic who had suddenly become their lifeline. The medics' voices came fast and clipped. "Strap secured, lifting now. 3, 2, 1, move." The helo sagged with weight, skids dragging through dirt before it clawed free. For a heartbeat, it wobbled dangerously. Elena's voice cut in like steel. "Power up. Nose steady. Ride the gust, don't fight it. Push now." The helicopter surged, blades slicing clean air. Dust fell away. The medics and the injured pilot were airborne safe. From the command post, officers leaned over consoles, eyes wide as Elena's calm voice carried across the channel. It was the voice of someone who had trained for this, who had done it before, who knew the difference between theory and survival. "She's running the whole operation," one controller whispered. "She's not supposed to be up there," another hissed back. "But if she wasn't," a third said, "that pilot would already be dead." High above, Shadow flight Titan formation, escorting the hello out of the valley. The colonel's voice broke through the comms, low but firm. Shadow 4, lead us out. The order stunned even the other pilots. To give the newcomer, an unacknowledged pilot, the point position was more than trust. It was recognition. Copy, Elena answered, her tone unwavering. She banked the Raptor west, guiding the formation home. On the ground, the base buzzed with disbelief. Mechanics, airmen, even junior officers gathered around screens, listening to her every command. Some stared in awe, others in frustration. But none could deny it anymore. Elena Cross wasn't bluffing. She wasn't lucky. She was leading. And the whole base had just witnessed it in real time. The mission was over. The downed pilot was alive. The helicopter was clear of danger. And for Elena, the hardest part was just beginning. Shadow flight, return to base, the colonel ordered. The formation wheeled west, the sun glinting across their wings. Elena kept her Raptor steady, the controls an extension of her hands. From altitude, Falcon Air Base looked small, harmless, just gray lines and tidy hangars against the earth. But she knew what waited on the ground was far from harmless. The tower's voice came, tight with hesitation. Shadow 4 cleared for straight-in approach. There was a pause, like the controller wasn't sure whether to call her airman, lieutenant, or nothing at all. Copy, Elena replied, her tone crisp, professional. She lowered the landing gear, felt the thunk beneath her boots, adjusted her glide. The runway stretched ahead like a long gray tongue. She touched down smooth, the wheels kissing asphalt with barely a tremor. Air brakes hissed, engines whined down, and the Raptor rolled to a stop as if it had always belonged to her. But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was judgment. Lining the edge of the tarmac were dozens of faces, mechanics in coveralls, pilots in flight suits, officers in pressed uniforms. Word of the mission had spread faster than fire, and now every eye was locked on her. Some gazes burned with admiration, others with suspicion, a few with open hostility. That was her, someone whispered. She flew the mission. She led it. She saved Rodriguez, another voice countered. She had no authorization, a captain muttered sharply. She's reckless, dangerous. The arguments rose in low waves, carrying through the crowd like static. Elena popped the canopy. Warm air rushed in. She pulled off her helmet and climbed down slowly, her boots striking the ground with deliberate weight. For a heartbeat, the base felt frozen, as though the air itself was waiting for her next move. Her father was there, standing among the senior officers, his uniform perfect, his jaw locked tight. His eyes followed her every step, not with pride, not even with anger, but with something colder. Control slipping through his fingers. Elena set the helmet under her arm, squared her shoulders and walked forward. She didn't smile. She didn't acknowledge the whispers. The silence followed her, thick and heavy. Half the base saw a hero, half saw a traitor, and Elena Cross walked between them, calm and unshaken. The summons came before dawn. An MP knocked on Elena's quarters with a sealed envelope. No words, just a stiff salute and the tap of a finger against the paper. Report to command chamber. 0800 hours. By the time she stepped inside, the room felt colder than any hangar. Flags lined the walls, polished wood gleamed under harsh lights, and at the head of a long table sat the colonel, posture sharp as a drawn blade. To his right was General Richard Cross, her father. He didn't look at her when she entered, his gaze fixed on a blank spot across the table, as if she weren't worth the acknowledgement. Elena Cross, the colonel said, voice clipped. Sit. She slid into the lone chair opposite them, spine straight, hands still. Somewhere, a recorder clicked on, its red light blinking steadily, capturing every breath. The colonel began. Yesterday, your actions saved a man's life. But they also raised questions we cannot ignore. Your flight, your coordination, your tattoo. His eyes flicked briefly toward her sleeve, where the ink lay hidden. TG-0717, Top Gun designation. That is not in your record. We need an explanation. The silence stretched until her father broke it, his voice cold and sharp. I submitted the request for investigation. Elena's stomach tightened, though her face remained calm. Of course it was him. The man who had humiliated her in the hangar was now pressing the blade deeper. Richard leaned forward, his eyes finally locking on hers. You've been misrepresenting yourself for years. That tattoo, what does it mean? Unauthorized training. False claim of status. Admit it. His words carried more venom than accusation. This wasn't about truth. It was about control. Elena's voice, when it came, was steady, deliberate. I never misrepresented myself. I did what was required when no one else could. Her father's jaw tightened. Don't dance around it. You embarrassed me in front of this base. You dishonor this uniform. Confess to what you've hidden, and maybe they'll show mercy. The colonel studied her, waiting. Elena kept her eyes locked on her father. Calm, unflinching. I won't confess to a lie. That tattoo isn't fraud. It's a marker of where I've been. What I survived. Richard's face darkened, his voice rising. You're hiding behind riddles. You embarrassed me before this command, and now you embarrass this entire service. But Elena didn't flinch. She spoke softer, but with more weight than his shouting could carry. No. Yesterday I honored it. When seconds mattered, I did what needed to be done. And you can't erase that with anger. The recorder's red light blinked on, off, on again, capturing every word. The colonel finally leaned back, his expression unreadable. This inquiry isn't over. Cross, you are confined to base until further notice. You will remain under observation. Yes, sir, Elena replied evenly. But as she rose, her father's glare followed her, burning with unspoken threats. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even disappointment. It was fear. Fear that the story he had told for years, that a mechanic could never fly, was unraveling before his eyes. The inquiry chamber faded from Elena's mind as she sat alone in her quarters that night. The walls pressed close, the silence heavy. She closed her eyes, and memory carried her backward, 12 years, to a desert base in Nevada. The air had been dry, searing hot, shimmering above the runway. She was 23 years old, her uniform still stiff with newness, her boots too clean, her heart hammering with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Graduation day. Around her, pilots tossed caps into the sky, their laughter carried on the desert wind. Families cheered from the bleachers, mothers waving flags, siblings hugging tightly, fathers standing tall with pride. Cameras flashed. The Top Gun emblem glinted on their certificates. Elena stood among them, certificate in hand, the weight of achievement heavier than any medal. Top Gun, the elite, the crucible where the best of the best proved themselves. She had survived it, excelled in it, outflown men who had entered convinced she would fail. Her specialty wasn't just precision flying. It was tactical integration, coordinating air assets, reading missions like chessboards, seeing 3 moves ahead while others only saw the next strike. Instructors had pulled her aside, nodding in respect. You have the instincts of a commander, they told her. But none of that mattered in the moment, because in the crowd of families, one seat remained empty. Front row, third from the left, reserved for General Richard Cross. She had saved that seat for him in her mind, imagined him walking in, imagined the rare moment of pride lighting his eyes. But the seat stayed vacant. The desert wind blew across it, carrying dust instead of applause. While the other graduates were lifted onto shoulders, wrapped in embraces, Elena stood alone. Her certificate clutched tightly, her smile forced for the cameras. No handshake from her father. No words of recognition. That night, as the sun set blood-red over Nevada, she had slipped away from the celebration. She found herself sitting in the empty bleachers, staring at the seat that had never been filled. And that was the night she realized, no matter how high she flew, her father would never see her as a pilot. The memory of Top Gun faded into another, the one she never wanted to relive. The mission that had broken her. She was 25, deployed overseas, flying as part of an escort detail for a medevac operation. The mission was supposed to be straightforward: extract 2 injured soldiers from a forward outpost under light fire. Standard risk, minimal exposure. But Elena had seen the reports differently. The terrain was unstable, the valley notorious for crosswinds and ambush points. She had studied the data, traced every contour line, and warned command. We need an alternate extraction point. If the winds shift, the helo won't clear the ridge. Her request was dismissed. You're young, Lieutenant Cross. Stick to your role and fly your escort. The orders stand. So she flew. She held formation as the medevac helicopter dipped into the valley, her radar sweeping for threats, her eyes scanning every shadow. At first, everything held steady. The medics reached the wounded. The helo lifted, skids barely clearing dirt. And then, the winds shifted, exactly as she had predicted. The helicopter bucked, nose tipping hard. The rotors clipped the edge of a tree line. Warnings screamed across the radio. Mayday, mayday, helo down! Elena's blood turned cold. She wheeled her Raptor into a desperate orbit, watching helplessly as the helicopter spun, then smashed into the ridge. Fire erupted, smoke curling into the sky like a black fist. She called for emergency support, her voice breaking protocol, shouting coordinates, begging for rapid response. But it was too late. The medics, the wounded, the pilots, all gone. And the report that followed, sanitized, stripped of her warnings, labeled pilot error. Her words had been erased, her protest buried. Her father, who sat on the review board, never once acknowledged her testimony. He simply signed off on the conclusion: accident, not command failure. That night, Elena sat alone in her quarters, staring at her bloodshot reflection in the mirror. She wasn't just grieving the lost lives, she was grieving the truth. She could have fought. She could have raised her voice higher. But at what cost? The system was bigger than her. Her father's influence stretched further than she could fight. So she made the choice. She turned in her wings. She requested transfer out of combat aviation. And she buried the pilot she had been. From that day forward, she told herself she was just a mechanic. Safer that way. Quieter that way. Easier to disappear. After the medevac disaster, Elena Cross made her decision. She requested a transfer. No more combat missions. No more formation flights. No more carrying lives on her wings while men in clean offices ignored her warnings. Her request was processed quietly. Almost too quietly. No arguments. No resistance. No attempt to keep her in the air. Her father had signed off on it immediately. And so, Elena became what the paperwork now claimed she was: the mechanic. At first, the transition felt like suffocation. She went from high-altitude silence and the pulse of afterburners to oil-stained gloves and the grind of wrenches. The mechanic's hangar smelled of grease and solvents, not jet fuel rushing at Mach speed. The younger recruits never asked about her past. To them, she had always been cross the tech. Dependable, quiet, good with diagnostics. She blended in, and she let them believe it, because silence was safer. Silence meant no one asked questions about Nevada, or the desert deployment, or the tattoo inked into her wrist. Silence meant her father's shadow loomed less heavily over her day. Years passed. She learned to live in routine, checking hydraulics, calibrating systems, listening for the subtle whine of a faulty actuator before it became a problem. Her work mattered, but it wasn't who she was. Not really. Sometimes, In the late hours, when the hangar was nearly empty, she would climb into an idle cockpit. Just to sit, just to remember. She'd rest her hands on the stick, close her eyes, and feel the ghost of what used to be. But always, when footsteps echoed, she slipped out quickly, tugging her sleeves down over the tattoo. Pretending again. It was a quiet existence, tucked between shadows and unspoken truths. And though she lived it well, a part of her never stopped listening, waiting for the day the silence would break. Elena had lived in silence for nearly a decade, but the events of the rescue changed something inside her. Flying again, feeling the sky answer her hands, had stirred not just memory but defiance. For years, she had told herself it was easier to let the past stay buried. But watching her father try to erase her once more, in front of an entire base, made one truth impossible to ignore. If she didn't fight back, he would win again. So she began to dig, quietly, carefully. At night, when the hangar emptied and the lights dimmed, she stayed behind under the guise of late maintenance checks. Instead of tools, she pulled personnel files, old mission records, logs buried in digital archives that few ever bothered to read. Piece by piece, a picture began to form. She found mission reports with her name scrubbed from commendations, tactical recommendations she had written, deleted, then reissued under another officer's signature. Emails with her father's authorization, redirecting promotions and opportunities to others while sidelining her into maintenance. And the medevac mission, the one that had broken her. There it was in black and white, her warning buried in drafts, replaced with sanitized phrasing before the final order went up the chain. Her father's name appeared again in the authorization column. He had silenced her then, just as he had tried to silence her now. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became. Her father was a general, untouchable to most. If he learned she was digging, he wouldn't hesitate to crush her career permanently. But Elena wasn't reckless. She copied every file, stored duplicates on encrypted drives, hid them in places even military police wouldn't think to check. She enlisted quiet allies, a clerk in records, a sympathetic tech sergeant, people who had seen enough of Richard Cross's adjustments to suspect the truth. And with every document, every email, every signed order she collected, her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every pilot silenced, every life risked by arrogance, every truth buried beneath the weight of his rank. Elena Cross was done hiding. She was building a case, and when it was ready, her father would face it, whether he wanted to or not. The night before the hearing, Falcon Air Base was unnervingly still. The hangars stood silent, their hulking silhouettes lit by pale floodlights. In the barracks, most of the crew slept. But Elena Cross was awake, sitting at her desk with the case files spread before her. Pages of copied orders, emails, mission logs, all neatly organized, ready for the tribunal at dawn. A knock broke the quiet. Heavy, deliberate. She already knew who it was before the door opened. General Richard Cross stepped inside without waiting for permission, his presence filling the room like a storm front. His uniform was immaculate, his voice measured, but his eyes carried the fire of a man used to absolute obedience. "You've gone too far," he said flatly. Elena didn't rise. She simply folded one document and slid it into the stack. "I'm doing what should have been done years ago." He moved closer, his boots striking the floor in clipped precision. "You think parading those papers in front of the board will save you? You'll ruin yourself. And worse, you'll ruin the family name." Elena finally met his gaze, her expression steady. "The family name isn't mine to protect. It's yours, and you've already stained it." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand how this works. The system bends to men like me. You think you're building a case? I've buried bigger scandals with half the effort. I'm giving you one chance. Burn those files. Walk into that room tomorrow and say you exaggerated. Admit you lost perspective. They'll forgive a mechanic for ambition. His words were smooth, practiced, like a speech he'd given before. But Elena heard the cracks in them, the fear beneath the authority. She stood slowly, squaring herself to him, their faces inches apart. "No, Father. I won't bury it this time. You silenced me once. You let men die because of it. And I let you. That's on me." Her voice hardened, sharper than steel. "But tomorrow I will speak the truth. And if that ruins your name, that's because you earned it." For the first time, Richard's composure slipped. His nostrils flared. His hand flexed like he wanted to slam the desk between them. But he didn't. He simply leaned closer, his voice dropping into a hiss. "You're making a mistake you can't undo." Elena didn't flinch. "No, I'm undoing yours." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouted argument. Finally, he turned, his boots echoing as he left the room without another word. The door shut. Elena let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked down at the stack of evidence, her hand steady. Tomorrow, everything would change. The command chamber was packed. Officers lined the benches in their dress blues, brass glinting under the harsh lights. A tribunal of senior commanders sat elevated at the head of the room, their expressions carved from stone. Elena Cross stood at the center, her uniform plain, her hair tied back, her stack of files neatly aligned before her. She wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She was a witness, a pilot, a survivor of silence. On the opposite side sat General Richard Cross, posture rigid, eyes narrowed. His ribbons and stars gleamed like weapons, but his jaw was tight. He was used to controlling the room. Today he couldn't. The colonel overseeing the proceedings cleared his throat. "This hearing will examine the conduct of General Richard Cross and the disputed record of Technical Sergeant Elena Cross. Present your evidence." Elena stepped forward. Her voice was steady, not raised, but every syllable carried. She laid down the first folder, mission logs with her tactical warnings stripped. The second, emails bearing her father's authorization, redirecting commendations and promotions away from her. The third, cockpit footage, grainy but clear, of the recent rescue mission. Her voice guiding the helicopter to safety with precision no manual could fake. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some leaned forward, recognizing the weight of what they were seeing. Others avoided her gaze, uncomfortable with the truths unraveling before them. Then came the testimonies. A sergeant from records confirmed she had filed warnings that never reached final reports. A pilot from Shadow Flight swore under oath that she had led the rescue operation. Even the medics from the helicopter, faces still pale from what could have been their last mission, testified that her voice had saved their lives. When she finished, Elena stepped back. The silence that followed was deafening. At last, one of the tribunal commanders turned toward Richard Cross. "General, your response." Richard rose slowly, his voice calm, measured. "My daughter is gifted, yes, but she is reckless. Everything you saw was improvisation, not discipline. She is dangerous in the sky." The words were strong, but his eyes betrayed him. He had spent years building the myth of her incompetence. Now it cracked. The senior commander leaned forward, his tone sharp. "General Cross, if this is not discipline, if this is not skill, if this is not excellence, then what is?" The question hung in the chamber like a blade. Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. His jaw clenched, his eyes flickered, but the silence betrayed him. For the first time, Richard Cross faltered. And for the first time, Elena felt the weight of his shadow begin to lift. The tribunal chamber was silent when the verdict was read. No applause, no shouts, just the heavy weight of finality. "Elena Cross," the senior commander announced. "Your record will be amended. Your Top Gun graduation reinstated. Your status as combat pilot restored, effective immediately." A pause. Then the second half of the sentence, delivered with the precision of a hammer striking steel. General Richard Cross, found guilty of misconduct, falsification of records, and abuse of authority. You are hereby demoted and placed under review pending discharge. The words hit the room like a shockwave. Gasps rippled among the officers. Some leaned forward as if they hadn't heard correctly. Others bowed their heads, avoiding Richard's eyes. For once, the general had nothing to say. His face, usually unreadable, now looked carved in stone, rigid, pale, hollow. He stood but didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't even look at Elena. He only walked out, his footsteps echoing like the fall of a dynasty. Elena remained standing at the center, her reinstatement papers in hand. She should have felt triumphant. She should have felt victorious. But instead, all she felt was free. 4 years, her father's shadow had smothered her. 4 years, she had hidden behind silence, pretending she was less than she was. That shadow was gone now, not because the committee had erased it, but because she no longer carried it. She wasn't defined by his lies. She wasn't defined by his approval. She was defined by the truth of what she had done and what she could still do. When she left the chamber, the air outside felt different, cleaner, sharper. A few officers saluted her quietly, respect glinting in their eyes. Others looked away, still uncertain. But it didn't matter. For the first time in 12 years, Elena Cross walked out into the sunlight not as a mechanic, not as a daughter fighting a war she never chose, but as a pilot. And that was enough.